project. My name is Barbara Lee. I'm a member of the Loomis Basin Historical Society and the Still Standing Guard Committee. It's so nice to see such a nice room full of people tonight because Still Standing Guard has such an important story to tell. And even those of us who are on the committee who thought we knew the history are finding out that there's a lot that we didn't know, and we're learning new things all the time. This evening's program is being co-hosted by the Loomis Basin Historical Society and the Friends of the Loomis Library in cooperation with the Loomis Library Community Learning Center and the Still Standing Guard Committee. So I'd like to take just a few minutes to introduce you to a few people. In the back of the room over here, Karen, can you wave your hand? This is Karen Clifford. She's president of the Loomis Basin Historical Society. And on this side of the room, we have Jenny Nisley and Beth Enright. Come right wave your hand. Co-presidents of the Friends of the Loomis Library, and we have Beth to thank for the refreshments tonight. And we have Sarah Nita. Sarah, Sarah is chairman of the Still Standing Guard Committee, and Sarah Comstock. Sarah is our community engagement librarian here at the Loomis Library, and so we thank her that we have you in the room here. Our speaker this evening is Rebecca Gregg. Rebecca is editor of the forthcoming book, Still Standing Guard. She is a professor emerita of photography and applied art and design from Sierra College. She was a founding member of the original Standing Guard Oral History Project at Sierra College, and she now serves on the Still Standing Guard Committee. So, may I present Rebecca Gregg.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm very happy to be here tonight, and also to see faces that I'm familiar with, you know, that I've seen and get to see occasionally. These people I see a lot. They're also on the committee. So I want to tell you kind of how I see this hour with you going. And to me, I want to be somewhat informal. This doesn't have very many notes on it. It's just to keep me kind of on track. And in having it informal is because I want to have some feedback from you. I want you to be brave enough to say something, okay? And I also want to share some of my philosophy of life, I guess, because I'm such a good dancer, as Deb Sutphin will tell you. The other day, she showed me a little clip from a Seinfeld show where it says, I think you do that with your Anyway, so having gotten that off my chest, I have to introduce you to my philosophy of life, or of history, and the importance of oral history. Because what this ball represents, in addition to my incredible dancing, is that it's reflecting all that it sees around it, but what it reflects from over here is not the same of what it reflects over here, obviously, but nonetheless true. And together, it makes a pretty complicated and truthful picture. But each square is important, and each square is a soothsayer for what it sees. And that leads me directly to say that's what oral history is so about. It's not necessarily what happened, but with all of those other reflections, the story can be gleaned to be the truth of what happened. You know, and when you read the oral histories, so many things turn up again and again that you start to think, well, they must have been on the same side of the disco ball, you know. And it also, with oral history, which is the bulk of the book, is the oral histories, you do see repetition, but also reading it carefully, you start to see the little uniquenesses of that story and how that story adds something new that you didn't have before in all the others, you know, some new little line. For example, Thea did an interview with Harriet Nakagawa in 1998, and it's in the book. So at first, when she gave it to me, I thought, oh, what do we do with this? You know, it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit my plan. And I had this idea that it would be these, these recordings that students had made, and then the forward-thinking one. And this was going backward to one. And then I read it. You know, so all that reaction was just kind of like, oh, what's my plan? You know, this is a different shaped brick, and what am I going to do with this? But when I read it, Harriet Nakagawa talks about when some folks at Tule Lake came threateningly to Tom Yago's barrack, and his sister ran to get help from other folks and kept bad things from happening. And Bunny Nakagawa borrowed a bat from the athletic department to keep in his barrack because he was so afraid, you know. And that hadn't been in any of the other, not the first book, not the second book. Everybody would talk about disagreements and the uncomfortable way and the pressure, but no one had mentioned actual encounters with violence. And then the week after that, or 2 weeks after, Fusai in one of our meetings talked about, and I got you on tape, girl, talked about going to school one morning because Fusai is 12 or 13 at the time, and she's off to school in the barracks, and she talked about passing a doorway where a hatchet had been buried in the doorway. And that wasn't in her first interview or anybody in this book, but I heard it, and it really resonated with me. The trauma of the daily outward tension at Tule Lake, you know, that it was something that a 13-year-old or a 12-year-old or 14, however, you know, I don't see that. You don't see that, a hatchet buried in the door. And soon after that, those folks were taken out for their own protection, you know. Which also I just learned, I think Barbara said that we kept learning things, but I'm not going to go ahead too much further without saying some other things, okay? So are y'all all right so far? This is pretty much what it's going to be like. So, you know, you signed up of your own free will to come here. So here we go. Hi, Tom. So let me start with Tom. Tom, stand up, Tom.
Hi.
Well, Tom and I taught together. We worked together for 20 years. I was on his hiring committee and still speak to him today. Isn't that great?
Way too often right now.
Way too often right now. Tom designed the first book, and he is the designer on the second book, and we'll talk some about what that correlation is. And he also has not only incredible skills from his 20 years of working in magazine design and graphic design. He was the designer of Pulse magazine for Tower Records, and so he came to Sierra with great real-life skills, and then for 20 years there taught students in graphic design and has successful students all over the place designing things that you have no idea who made that business card or that logo or something, but could be it was one of Tom Philbrown's students. And it's been an incredible pleasure for me. I'm so ready for the book to be done, and I bet you are too. I can tell you, and so are the weeds in my yard, you know, that they're very ready. But I have had no other, you know, I taught for more than 50 years. I had an amazing career, which I'm so grateful for. I have a student who calls me every morning at 8 o'clock. Isn't that something? I haven't had my coffee yet, call back in a little bit. You know, and so, yeah, every morning, Jesse. And Jesse was a wonderful photography student. So I've had a rich, rich career and a rich, rich engagement with this community. But nothing holds a candle to this experience. In the depth that it's taught me and continues to. This happened the last time, and I told myself I wasn't gonna, sorry. So sometimes I get a little verklempt, you know. So I want the folks who are involved in this second publication, the Still Standing Guard group, would you raise your hands or stand up? I'd love to see you stand up. Yeah, look at them. They're people you know. Stuart's our spokesperson practically, you know, he's represented us so many times. Dot keeps us straight with, how are you going to advertise this? You know, the great money raiser that she is, Fusaya, I've already mentioned, keeps us on track in terms of historical reckoning, you know, and thinking about things. And Thea's right now is secretary, and contributed one of the narrations on the, so I'm afraid, I'll just tell you that group, I'll sum it up with what Joanne said, not the last meeting, but the meeting before, right at the end. She said, we were talking and laughing a little bit. Usually we stay on course and we get a lot of things done, but she said, we've become a family. And we did it without bylaws. So it's been a rich experience, even without the resulting book. The things that we've put on yearly, from panels that you may have gone to. I'm going to move back this way just so I can see, the panels that were at the Blue Goose, and we have a program coming up. You got those things. Tomorrow is the movie that's at Dietrich Theater in Kutzeroy. I didn't say it perfect, but it was not bad, yeah. And I want to tell anybody who wants to go, tell me tonight, I'll buy you a ticket, because it's a wonderful movie, and it will give you a breadth of understanding about, it's at 2 o'clock tomorrow at the theater. The range of what it covers in this history is amazing, really. And the filmmakers are going to be there. So if you have a chance to go, let me know and I'll buy you a seat. Okay, so that's kind of covers us and who we are. I have to tell you that Deb Sutphin Deb was my boss, and now it really is. And she wrote what's the chapter of the book that's called Context, was the introduction the last time in the first book, and she also wrote the introduction this time. And the introduction is so different than last time's introduction. The introduction this time is making parallel. It's sort of like history, why, and it's dealing with what the importance of history, and she uses some very concrete examples, but one of them may surprise you, and that's Gone with the Wind, and how Gone with the Wind became the story and the understanding of the Civil War when it really wasn't accurate, and yet because it was so vivid, it became kind of this historical memory, and people got out of school. Her mother remembers getting out of school to go watch Gone with the Wind. So it was just like this amazing, impactful movie. So she's not talking this time on the introduction so much about this book, but actually lifting higher than that to look at the role of history, sort of like the role of a lot of different opinions of, and how there's not one that you can say is right, is it. It takes all of our putting our opinions out and our thinking out about that, so I'm willing this to Barbara Leake when, because she likes it. She was the one that wanted me to bring it tonight, so there it is. It's the homage to that. Okay, so this is what I want to hear from you. I want 3 people to tell me what brought them here tonight. So do one. Hands up, somebody. Me. Uh-oh, pressure. Huh. You didn't just come to see the prom ball? Okay, well, that's flattering, David. Thank you very much. The first time we did this, David was the top bill in doing his Japantown book. and he's still the go-to person who has another go-to person. He just told me in an email recently for things you want to know about this, not only this region, but especially Penryn and Newcastle region. So I need 2 more.
I'm Maxine Sonata, and I was born at Tule Lake.
Ah.
And that's why we didn't get back here until 1946.
Yeah.
But I was much more Japanese when my parents were alive. Now I call myself a banana. Yellow on the outside, white on the outside, like an Oreo. But I thought I'd better get more familiar with,
Good.
But my parents died very early, in the early 50s, and so I haven't been very Japanese or oriented or, in the community as much as I was then. So I felt, gosh, I've had opportunities before to come to these presentations, but I haven't. But I'll be 80s. I think it's time I came.
Welcome to my decade. Yeah. It's not as bad as people say. It's not exactly the new 40s either, but yeah. So I really am glad I asked that question. I would probably never have known that about you, and neither would these. So you were, what year were you born? You're about to be?
I was born in October 1945, and the war had ended.
Yeah.
But my mother was so pregnant that they didn't leave until February 46 to come back to Placer County.
Right. And the camp closes in March of 46. Tule Lake was the last camp to close. It was the largest and the last camp to close. And so it must have been odd for her parents. That's one of the things this time that's happening to me. There's some more chairs if you want to come in. There's one right there, but she's probably coming back. Yeah, she's coming back. One of the things that's happening to me this time as I read more about Tule Lake and think about folks as real people is what it would have felt like. Tule Lake had 18,000, he's on a Zoom call if y'all think he's already bored. It's not true, he's got to do a Zoom call. He politely told me that so that I wouldn't feel bad, so get back here. So Tule Lake had 18,000 people at its peak population. It was in Siskiyou County. It would take 3 towns in Siskiyou County to make as many people as that. And even today, there's not another place that is as big as that. And that was true of most of the internment locations, that wherever they were the biggest city in that county. That's how sparse it was. So, but it was very communal. In fact, Asa Hanamoto, who is in this book, said in his interview, he said that it was so strange to go from being with your family to being in a community, and everything was communal. Showers were communal, eating was communal, and before you ate around your own family's table, but then everything you do, is with other people. And also they came from very diverse societies and went to a very homogeneous society, where the only people who were non-Japanese heritage were the military police and the administration, and a few teachers and a few other specialists with, like at not only the teachers, but sometimes they had to have specialists come in for operations and that kind of stuff too. So they had specialist doctors. But so it was really a very different life. Well, think about your parents. They're there. You can't remember any of this, I guess, no? Or I was going to be impressed. That you go from a place where there are somewhere between 14,000 and 18,000 people, 300 eating at a time in the mess hall, 3 meals a day. The first bell's rung at 8 o'clock, and there's a mess hall for every block. So the bell's ringing, but I bet you know your bell, or maybe that guy rings it just special for his. But 300 people ate together, and after a while, most of the teenagers started eating together. So once again, the family part gets eroded. Instead of eating around your table at night, you're eating with your gang, and the old folks are eating together or something. But Steve Fujioka, I think, talks about that that was one of the things that he liked about Tule Lake, is that they had the families grouped together at first at the mess hall. And then when they go to Topaz in Utah, they didn't do that anymore. And he missed that. He missed seeing his family in those places. But anyway, when you're back there imagining her as a baby and her mom recovering from the birth, and I think most people are gone so this place that had had so many people must have felt pretty barren by then. And like, wow, where is everybody? So the 300-seat mess hall might have 10 people in it, or 20, but not many people. I'll give you a resource especially for the Historical Society, because not only do I admire the work that you do, I'm jealous of your attention to detail and your curiosity, and I can't thank Barbara Leake enough for being our local historian. The things that she has dug up for us have just been amazing, So when you have a chance, look at the final, I'm going to miss it. I always call it just the FAR, the final accountability roster. Final accountability roster. And it reminds you a little bit of the Germans' incredible note-taking of all their activities, and keeping track. So every person that came in, you can see their birth date, their gender, and what assembly camp they came from, what day they arrived, and where they left to. So you can see that on your parents, or for every camp, you can tell where they went. And one of the people I was reading just today, from camp, their family really scattered. I'm not sure who I was reading today, but to tell you that. But they went to Chicago, Minneapolis was one, so they may have eventually come back, but they didn't go from camp back here. Most people in Placer County did come back here, and most came back to California, if not here. Quite a few went to Lodi. So if you ever want to look at something fascinating, look up the final accountability roster. And so let me tell you, you remember the hatchet story that Fusai said? Okay, so I started looking up Tom Yago on the FAR. He and his family all arrived at Tule Lake by what's coded DE, and that means direct evacuation. So he didn't go up with everybody else, and neither did anybody in his family. And he also left earlier, probably because of the baseball bat thing. But you can only go probably. You can't say that really happened. You can just kind of try to guess what happened. But it was very interesting that because Tom was a leader here in Penryn with the JACL, and he was very vocal. So did that influence that his whole family, quite a few people, went up separately. And that happened with other people, usually who were infirm in some way, couldn't make the trip, and so they were bussed up separately. Maybe someone who's pregnant, because there were, even at Arboga, there are births that happen in Arboga, though they were only there just a few weeks before they go up to Tule Lake. Boy, I'm going on and on. We haven't even done that. Who's the third? Yes, ma'am.
Well, it's part of my family lineage, of course, and my family history, and out of respect for you, you're such an inspiring speaker, and so I wanted to be here to support you as well. And then thirdly, it's very timely, I think. The Enemy Alien Act is being used again in the United States, and I think that we do have to revisit history, and we do have to keep things in perspective and realize how the winds of politics can influence history and what is happening today.
That's so well said, Maureen. One of the things that Tom and I talk about all the time is what a different time this is now. The lessons were meaningful the first book 20 years ago, 25 years ago almost. that, but they strike us as very meaningful now. This is Maureen Otani, and I worked with her mother, and she was quite the influence in my life.
And her mother's in the first book.
And her mother's in the first book. And her grandfather, I learned just because of this book, set the road as a straighter path to the sheds from the Otani house and farm that's on the corner of Rockland Road and Sierra College Boulevard. So he was arrested as one of the people that the FBI rounded up as being, suspicious, the fifth column and all that stuff. He was one of those folks. And her father was a Bronze Star winner, I think, awarded the Bronze Star for his heroism in action in Europe. And Robert, so very important family. Ida, her mother, was the registrar when I first started as a 25-year-old straight out of graduate school, would never get hired with that kind of experience today. But I'd never met anyone of Japanese heritage or any Asian before, except in restaurants, so. And we didn't have any restaurants in our town. It was a town of 250 people that I lived 7 miles from without a phone. So there were no Japanese folks there, though it was a farm.
Rebecca, I
Yes.
just wanted to share that
Good.
we were up at one of the plays in Nevada City, which was Asian. And we were with the Iwasaki's and Lila Sasaki's daughter. No, Lila Sasaki. And so we were asking them, how did you feel about being in the camp? And Lila was a teenager, and she said, I hated it because my mother was so sad. And Ken, who was 8 at the time, he was at the camp, thought it was great, all these kids to play
Exactly.
with. It just different
Right.
perspective according to age and
Right.
how family reacted to it.
And you'll see that same thing in this book, and that's this, again, because Nob Nomura is in this book, and he talks about, for him, it was great because his family lived in the same place for 4 years. They had flush toilets, they had good schools, sports of any kind that you wanted, so for him it was great because his dad was not exactly a migrant worker because he stayed here, but they weren't really even exactly tenant farmers because they weren't sharecroppers necessarily. He says in the book, our family was poor. We were the lowest of the low. And so they were dependable laborers who often got housing and all that, but minimal. And so for him and for others, it was a good thing, especially for the teenager group. And then the younger ones didn't know better. But I think the hardest hit group were the Issei because they could only volunteer for jobs. They couldn't get paid for jobs. As aliens, they weren't getting the minimum $12. It was 12, 16, and 19. It was the max. But they couldn't get that, So I think I've learned a lot, but it's been joyful learning. And I think that's the approach that we all take, everybody in this room, is to continue learning, to continue that step. So, I got 3. Okay, then I want to tell you some things about the book. And here's 3 more then. I want 3 more of these. What do you hope to learn, or what do you want to ask? Okay, so I might not answer it now, but what do you hope to learn, or what do you want to ask about the book? Usually this comes at the end, and everybody's ready to get to the cookies. So we're just going to do it at the beginning. So what do you hope to learn, or what do you want to ask? I need 3, or I'm not moving on. Yes, ma'am?
I would like to know the intimate details of life in the camps, because so much that you read is just kind of, well, they had this and they had this, and they had to use a latrine, or they had to use a mess hall. But the little details of stories, like in Helen Hara's book. So I so enjoyed her book,
Mm-hmm.
and I look forward to seeing her next month.
Yeah, this is one of the, thank you, Thea, for that. This book, 2 Days in One Suitcase, was written by a Caucasian woman, and she's in her 90s now, and is going to be with us. And it's written at the youth kind of level, which makes you feel pretty smart when you're reading it, you know. and because you can read faster than you sometimes, you know, the type is pretty big. But it's a very, not only the feeling for her family, but also the role of religion in their family, in the sense of the religion's role to teach us the straight and narrow, to, you know, to kind of teach us moral values and things are very much in here, and the sense of right and wrong in treatment. And this kiddo is only 12, I think, when she's, and it's based on her notes. Stu arranged all of this, and so we're really looking forward to it. She's going to speak at Del Oro and also at the Blue Goose, so see you next month, I hope. You know, I don't know, Thea, that, well, I'm not going to answer them all now, okay, because I'm looking at the clock. Okay, I need 2 more volunteers. Tell me something you want to know, or what was the other one?
Something you want to ask.
Something you want to ask. Yeah.
About the new book.
Yeah, about the new book.
New Standing Guard.
Yeah.
The protectors. How many do you have in there?
How many protectors? So okay, I'll hold that question. Good. Do one more, and then we'll get through this, and I'll answer those. One more. What you want to know about the book, or a general question that you have about it. Yes, ma'am.
See the list of all the people in Placer County that you compiled that went into the book.
Okay, cool.
That will be in one place now.
One place, good. So I'm going to tell you right now the chapters, okay? Uh-oh. What? Oh, one more?
I just wondered, when people returned, when the Japanese returned, were they able to get their homes back, their jobs, their businesses?
Sometimes, and sometimes not, yeah. And some of that is in the book. So actually your question, in a way, overlaps. So here we go. Thea, I don't know that in this book you're going to feel the intimacy in some ways, because I think, especially perhaps that generation, you know, you just don't talk about, especially, you know, the phrase, the shigatakanai and gaman, the doing, you know, it can't be helped because it's done, it's over, don't be dwelling on that, move on, think positive. That attitude was deeply ingrained. And so you didn't want to be a complainer or talk about that. Just like in the first book, kids didn't know what their parents, you know, Joanne and Gordon are not only tremendous supporters and have great knowledge of the community, but they also were interviewed by Tom Blackburn, the high school chum who played music too. And part of what Joanne tells in the book is that she was going to go to camp, and so she asked her mom, you know, didn't know what to pack, and so she said, "You went to camp, what do I take to camp?" Was that a good imitation? Yeah, good. And her mom said, "It wasn't that kind of camp." You know? And can you imagine, because that sounded like it was a little different than her mother might ordinarily say, so she's thinking, well, what kind of camp was it? You know, and all that. You know, it's a big thing. It wasn't that kind of camp. And she didn't learn about it until later in another class, and to the depth of it. Although got guidance from her mother about what to take to this camp, I guess. I guess she didn't send you. So I think you have to read them. I think people were trying not to complain too much, trying not to dwell on it too much. But Lila has told me in times past that her mother essentially went to bed, and Lila was left to raise Kenji. You know, was the one who took care of him most. And she didn't say that as complaining, but just observing and what it was like. And her, at the end of Lila's story in the first book, she says, for me it was okay, but for my parents, it was terrible, you know. And when you get that knowledge, that's deep stuff, you really feel it then. But over and over they say in this book, if it wasn't, if it was for our protection, why were the guns pointed in? So like Deb's example of the reason for the Civil War not being about slavery, which is the myth part, this has a certain myth that you do kind of wonder, because it's one of these perspectives. Were they more protected? We can't know. If they, what would have happened to them if they had been left in communities. But I can tell you in the new book, there are pages that show the patriotism of the Japanese Americans. That the ad that Barbara found for us that was published just a few days after, after the, not even, it was even before the executive order was signed. It was after the bombing. And a full-page ad is taken out with a flag our flag at the top of it, saying, the feelings of patriotism in this country by the Japanese. By the group was called the Japanese Permanent Residents. So people who were Issei who were allowed to be here, So there was a lot of hardness that I think we won't know. And the last time I talked in Auburn about this same thing, a woman she stood up and she shared that she went to the display. The college built a barrack in the arts gallery. So one of the astronomy teacher took charge, and they built a barrack, not one apartment, not a whole barrack. They're 100 feet long. So this was like one apartment. And Deb and I drove to Klamath Falls, and they loaned us a coal-burning, pot-bellied stove, which we drove down here, and a searchlight, and that was in there, and other things, the bare bones of how a barrack was set up. Well, this woman stood up at the end of the talk, and she said, I took my mother to see that exhibit, because there was art on the walls and the barrack in the middle. I took my mother to see that exhibit because she was at Tule Lake. And then she says a little bit more, and then she said, she asked, Mom, was this like it was? This is better. Yeah. That was her answer. This was better. So I think we don't know until a thin paper wall, almost. I mean, it has just tar paper on the outside of boards, what that would be like at Tule Lake, and all very, pretty cold, pretty windy, pretty dusty, pretty terrible. And they do talk about that. And of course, a lot is talked about the lack of privacy, because that's that communal living again, is the lack of privacy. And just this week I read something that said the latrines were set up army style. That's what they called it, army style, where there are no stalls and you're just sitting next to your buddy. And so men are more used to that from service, maybe, but women are not very used to that. And so it was a terrible affront to their personal dignity. And especially women have periods. Women have different issues, kind of, and so that would have been really hard for a young girl and for someone in menopause. This could be really a loss of dignity too. There are a lot of things that when you compare your own life, you can really empathize with what that would have been like. I can imagine that I would have been having fun on the softball team or something, I would have been doing something. But I would have been worried about my mom and dad too, so. I might have forgotten the other questions. When is the book? Okay, so here, what? Protectors, okay, so here they are. So the book has chapters. And the first chapter is actually I used Deb's framework of what was the historical part, and it's called the context. And so because we're not connected with the first book, the context lays the historical grounding of what caused this and what this was about, but back to 1790, which is the law that's being used right now you know, and it was updated several times just in that decade. So it's back from then, up. That's the first chapter, and we called it the context, so you can see where this happened in, what the setting was. The next chapter after that is the histories, and that's the students did 23 oral histories. Nope, wrong again, 22. That was my basketball number. How could I forget that? 22 was also the highest score I ever made. So thank you very much, not bad. Huh? I wish I'd been wearing 34 or something, you know, but anyway. So 22 were done by students. And then Thea on Harriet Nakagawa, that made 23. And then we have 7 more interviews that were updated for now. And so Karen Lohurst is James Ueda's granddaughter is in there as a Yonsei, you know, 4th generation, and is talking about the realities of now and her own family, and seeing the day that her granddad told her mother and her aunts that he was in prison for 3 years for resisting the draft. That's what it was for. And he was part of the 86 people from Heart Mountain. So that's all their stories. So there are 30 stories, and like these guys were interviewed in the same time. So really there are more people than that, but it's 30 stories. The magic that we had the first time was that when students were asking you, this young student asking me, this old woman, I want to teach him then, you know. So they opened up a lot because they were teaching this person. Now we're, you know, level to level. Tom is a peer of Gordy's. And so that element of the teaching thing is not quite there, except that a lot's happened in between. And so people are talking more readily now than they were. That was one of the unintended consequences of the first Standing Guard book, is that we had no idea that it would open up the community so much, and it did, and how wonderful that it did for individual families and for the community, I think. And we were sort of like Andy Rooney, let's do a play, you know, let's do a book. And so we just didn't know that it was going to be so wonderful as this, you know. So still to your question, Rich Hanner, who is Judy Hayashida's husband and also a wonderful writer, he was a newspaper editor. He interviewed, I believe, 6 people whose family or persons in their family acted as protectors in different ways. And one of them was here earlier, but there he is again. I thought you were sitting that way, but there he is. Jerry Llewellyn and his dad, Johnny, whose name is spelled with 1 N. Johnny was a field man. Yeah, I don't know exactly what that means, but he was a field man, and part of what it means is that you know the farmers really well. And so he had friendships with these folks. And he was a protector because he helped those farms either stay or paid taxes or, you know, took on by, not as a part of his job, but a part of his being, of who he was. And so he's one of the people that's interviewed. So Rich Hanna pulls together at least 6 of those. And one of them is the Nakai, Howard Nakai and Carol Iwasaki. The guy, a friend of theirs, Dan Mansabo, took care of their place. You know, so they're very intimate stories of people who just, though called Jap lover, stood up in their community to do the right thing, you know, or the thing that they thought was right. So, and then I wrote a a little more turgid, a little more academic than Rich's style. I envy his style, but it's sort of like your handwriting. You sort of stuck with what you got, you know. So my portion of that is the businesses that organized to help. And Barbara especially did, and another thesis writer several years ago, Anna Martinez, wrote a thesis about the fruit house corporations. So Loomis and Florin were two places, the only two places, according to Ms. Martinez, who set up fruit house corporations to run farms, and to put renters in the houses and stuff. And in the part that Rich wrote about, one K&M Garage, Masuo Matsuda, he has a friend, Emil Saladana, and we have letters between the two of them of how, and one of the letters is published in the book. And so you can see, the one we chose is the banker vouching for Emil doing a good job, but Emil and Matsuo are obviously good friends, And so, but the Fruit House Corporation, so I go through some of those things in less, but it's not individual people, it's just the kind of corporate, the business, and our phrase for it is good neighbors make good business, because when you see that the fruit production was half shipped out of here, half in 1942 than it was in 1941. And so that affects everyone. The people eating the fruit in Pennsylvania and the people right here who are working, jobs and everything. It was devastating. Not just because people went to the war, as servicemen, but the laborers, the people who had been working farms, young men and women who had been working farms, the young women went to be Rosie the Riveter and make more money, and the young men did too. They didn't all go to the service. And so there wasn't anybody to work. That's when the Prosero program was introduced. Getting people to ship out all this stuff was really, really complicated. It is the John Muir thing of everything being connected to everything else. So when you stopped production, the domino effect of that was enormous. And the people, the numbers, I think so in the book we have a little 2-page thing that's just numbers. And what it does is give the population of, let me think which one it was. Penryn, I think, Penryn's with somebody else. Loomis, Rockland was 700, under 800 people, 702 two more numbers, but under 800 at that time. And remember, the population at Tule Lake is 18,000. So you go, and so it was just a different community that you moved into, and you came from here and it wasn't like that at all. So protectors is one of the sections that we are most pleased about, because we didn't get into the thing of, because there were still bad people. We have at least 3 people in the book who talk about their house being burned, especially when they were about to come back. And part of that is another reflection. So you've got these transient folks, the dust bowlers, and I say that with I'm from Texas partly, and so the dust bowlers came out, and they don't have the same investment in the land, so they don't take care of the houses, but they probably see this as they've been working this place, say that they were successful, just making this up. They were successful. They're working this place for the last 3 years, and now the Japs get to come back, and they burn down the house because it was their chance to have this place, and that I'm sure happened sometime, that it was personal, things were taken out of the house, all that, and they, please forgive me for being dramatic, but I think that was probably true, that's why they did it. They didn't want people back. And, it was almost never investigated because an FBI guy says in Okusu's narrative, who's going to rat on their friends? So they just didn't know. And the people who were charged in the Doi incident, which isn't in this book, but in the Doi incident, they were let go. So we've got protectors, and then comes the part that Sarah likes. There were people who came to Placer County to avoid being evacuated, and their names also appear because they came up with to be with relatives thinking they were far enough away from the coast, but then it didn't work. So there are 10 pages, I think. Is that right, Tom?
Yeah.
Probably 10 pages that list their hometown, their surname, and all their names and all their kids' names. And some of them had really big families too, and so it's 10 pages of name after name. And I don't know of any place that I've ever seen that does that lists, the Takagishis right there and all those kids. Yeah, because it's Placer County only. Yeah. And of course, most of the folks lived in here, Loomis, Penryn, and Newcastle. There were folks who lived in Auburn and Rockland and Roseville, but not anything like this population. 30 to 35% of the grammar school was Japanese American when the evacuation happened. So yeah, that's a lot of kids, and Penryn was higher than that even. And then the next chapter, so there's the families, and then there's this new thing, Casa Barbara. Barbara sent this little article she found, and it was about the new citizens. Well, the Issei couldn't be citizens until 1952. So they may have been here 40 years, but they couldn't be a citizen. And there's a lot of language in all of this. They were categorized as aliens, which is pretty scary in itself if you think about it, the way we think about aliens. But aliens, and then the people who weren't aliens were called non-aliens. Not citizens, but non-aliens, So you had yourself aliens and non-aliens, but it rather than aliens and citizens, So in 1952, the law was passed. 2 Democrats, one from Pennsylvania. Where's the other one from? Oklahoma? McCarran? Where's he from? Anyway, they're both Democrats. Walters from Pennsylvania, and they pass a law that allows citizenship. And when you look at the FAR, because you're so interested in the FAR now, when you look it up, some people are citizens, and they are the rare people who were soldiers in World War I. They were allowed to be citizens, and so So you had citizens and non-citizens. So in 1954, 117 people became citizens for the first time. And so that's the last chapter of the book, is alien to citizen. Yeah. And the great thing that happened among our group when Barbara sent it out to us, Stu said in his email, "I didn't know my grandmother got her citizenship."
Oh.
Isn't that sweet? See, that's why I tear up all the time. Yeah, and you said, and they're my grandparents, and Joanne found her grandparents, both sides of, in the list. So it's worth it. Then, just because I've held you so long, the last part, which I'm particularly pleased about, because I'm particularly pleased about the whole damn thing, actually. But sometimes we cry over the phone. Yeah. Yeah. So the last part of the book, though, the appendix, isn't to be overlooked when you buy your copy. The first part is an updated chronology. And so it goes right to 2024. It doesn't include the stuff that we're mired in now, the strange, chaotic ride we're on. It doesn't include that, but it does include right up to 24.
Paul's recognition.
Including,
Paul's.
oh yes, including, the last entry is Paul Yokote Day and the picture of Paul on his porch. That is the last entry. And the day of June 18th is Paul Yokoti Day, declared by, the town council. So, yeah, and that's the last thing. Thanks, Tom. The next part is the glossary. So we've updated that with, I got to go back to chronology. We go bang, 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 this happened, week after week. And you really, when you read that, you get a sense of how fast this thing happened. It's, it's not long till February 19th, and then bam, 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 bam. Got to go register, got to go get your typhoid shot, got to go, and it's all right there, down. And that's pretty cool. The glossary is the next part, and then a part that I wanted in so much I referred to is just some charts, about 6 charts, that one of them I called, what was it, Tom? Tule Lake Factoids. And so it tells how many latrines there were. Oh yeah, the guardhouse, that's great. Okay, Tule Lake was very contentious, and they had riots, and they brought tanks in, and all this stuff is very unstable for the people who were pro-Japan and the people who were pro-America, and they were all living there together. So before that, the fence around Tule Lake was 4 feet high, and there were probably, don't quote this, there were 9 or 10 guard towers. Or 11, 10, I think, guard towers. After the riots, there were 28 guard towers and an 8-foot fence. And the guns were still pointed in. So also in the glossary, also in the appendix, are 2 things that I really wanted in, and Tom said, okay. And then finally he says, no more. Okay, so we're done. So one is a recounting of Standing Guard, because Standing Guard was really a magical time for the time that it arrived and all that happened. So I just wrote several pages of all that we did, because I wanted a record of it somewhere, because when, in a book is kind of the most permanent way to do that. So it's several pages long, got a couple pictures in there. The last day where Anthony Gill outlined 1,800 bowls, and you could come that were made with the ash, part of the ash from the soil at Tule Lake. You could come and pick up a bowl. Some people in this room, I bet, have a bowl. I have several bowls. I gave one of mine away. Yeah, to get inside, you had to sign away your citizenship, and then choose your bowl and come back, and then you were checked off. You were okay. It was this huge thing. It had a fence. It's really great. So there's a little picture of that, and then the chapter that is in there is what we've done. The Still Standing Guard group is also in there, but just outlining. Kathy is here, who has been our moderator on several things and will be again, and so it says her name, and it says what we did, just so it'll be known, that people can look back and see this here, And I think that then it comes to the biographies of people who were there, and then the last thing is the bibliography. So we're turning it in on Sunday. Monday. Tom and I met over the phone 2 hours today. We met a lot, probably more than our offices were adjacent. We've seen each other more in the last 16 months than the 16 or 20 years that we worked together. So we're turning it in on Monday. We got a new bid. It's way bigger than the first time. It's 225 pages. 216. See, he cut me off there. 216. Okay. He said, "That's it. We're done."
It went from 160 to 216. And that reflects the new information. I want to share one thing, I think, if I may.
Oh, yes, you may.
Being involved in the first book was personal histories of everybody, right? This time, we've got different generations talking about it. And so you get the sense of how the healing happened. And it's very profound for me. Because there was a healing process. The community came back and embedded themselves back in this area.
and became members of the community in big ways. And it's fascinating. So I applaud just everybody in the tenacity of what it took to rise out of this and make a life. And that's the most powerful thing for me.
Yeah.
And yeah, we cry a lot.
So my time is up, and
Can we pre-order?
yes, you can pre-order. In fact, we hope you do. I'm not much of a salesperson, but I believe in this so strongly. I think that you should buy a book, and you should. I don't care if you aren't a Japanese heritage person. For your kids need to read this book, probably when they're in high school or something. You know, for their senior project, or maybe they're better readers than I am. Maybe they can read it before then. But I think to keep it, I think to buy it for a local library. You know, send it to a library back home in Oklahoma, because nobody back there has heard about it. You know, even now, it's Still Standing Guard, and it's Still Standing Guard : telling our stories. And you can order it. There's our website is on there. On the Sierra College website, it's very easy. And they take your, email address and all that stuff, and you can pay then. It's $80 for the 80th anniversary, which is when we started doing this. And also because paper's more expensive and everything's more expensive than it used to be. When did the first book come out? In 2002. And that was it cost $60, and that's because it was the 60th anniversary. That's how we came up with it. So it's going to be it's thicker, but slightly smaller than this, and it will still have the kanji here, and still have this, and the picture on the back, I see your hand, Glenn, I'll come right back. The picture on the back is different. It's a young couple, Martha Miyamura and her husband, Kay, are getting married. And their barrack is behind them, and Martha's standing there, with her little bouquet of paper flowers, and their son is born at Tule Lake, Larry, and Kay's grandfather died at Tule Lake. So the life cycle is there in that family. Glenn, you had a question.
StillStandingGuard.com.
It's not on that flyer.
Oh, it's not on that flower?
.com.
Yeah.
Sierra Press Foundation.
Or StillStandingGuard.com.
Standing Guard, are we ordering through the foundation?
Yeah, and
You
it's
can-
stillstandingguard.com.
Yeah, still standing.
On
Yeah,
the website.
yeah. StillStandingGuard.com has the QR code. Yeah, and that gets you to the foundation. The foundation is really an easy way, and they're holding our money. They don't charge us anything for it, but they do that. Yeah, it's really nice. Hey, I have nothing else to say to you except I really enjoyed the informality of this and your interest, and I hope that you will continue. The support from this community has been amazing. So I hope that you'll continue to keep this story alive. And the patience. Yeah, the patience. So the book, when we get it there, get that if word out, when we get it there on Monday, we think that it will be back to us at the beginning part of June, and we'll have 1,000 books. Last time we had 1,500. And we have 1,000 books this time. And the little seed money, the difference in printing, and that will go toward other projects, especially supporting the garden. But our first project is to get the tapes from the interviews digitized, and get some of that protected. Yeah.
I have two things to share. First of all, the first run on the first book was 1,000, and it sold out, so we ordered 500.
Yeah.
This time we're just going to go with 1,000, and we'll always be able to reorder. And the difference for now on this particular one is with our digital demand, you don't have the expense that it takes to do preparation for printing. Mm-hmm. So we would be able to pick up, the copies, make more copies. Now, I don't know if this will happen. The first book, unfortunately, would have to be reworked in order to bring it back up for publication because it was done old style and all that printing plates and everything have gone, and the software I used at the time is no longer around. But I could rebuild the book, and we may be able to look at offering the first book as paperback, which can be all done locally. We have to send this off to Arizona to get it hardcover.
Yeah.
There's only one place on the West Coast that hardcover.
Yeah.
But anyway, that could possibly be something in the future if we find, and we could print on demand. So if we'll just have to wait, because we got questions today, and where's the first book? Is it still possible?
Yeah.
And it could happen. But if you see one floating around, I'd pick it up.
They're selling online for $100, so it's, they're selling online for $100 when you can find it.
Right.
Yeah.
But, we might have, we'll see what kind of demand there is. Most of you either have friends or your families themselves have the first book, and so and it does companion well with the second book does companion well with it, but we'll see what happens. But
Stuart's in it.
Stuart's in the book, yeah.
And his
So there's, and so in that regard, see what happens, eh?
We anticipate that there could be a reaction this time that might not be always pleasant, because you just can't read things like that, but we're sure that we're ready for that no matter what, because it sounds corny probably, but we are still standing guard.
Right. There's a lot of honesty in these stories. I mean, from the first book, you all know, I mean, we all have family members and stuff like this. There's the Polk is provocative. Like, it wasn't a very nice place.
Yeah. It wasn't very pleasant, people say. It wasn't very pleasant.
Yeah, and things like that. I mean, we've tried to help people, just looking at the book, get a sense of what the content's about by what we've chosen to pop out so people can start to read the story or compare with some kind of. And so, again, we just, trying to have a good historical record of some really bad stuff as we begin to see what it looks like now, something we'd never see again.
Yeah. Well, I applaud you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to extend how grateful, not just myself, but I know our families. And like you mentioned, growing up, our parents, my parents, my grandparents, even my great-grandma, they didn't really talk about it. And like you said, that project just opened up and the families just came flooding with their experiences.
We wouldn't have still standing guard if it wasn't for Rebecca.
Right.
And Tom.
And Tom.
And Deb.
And Deb. Well, Deb, we wouldn't have had the honorary degree thing without Deb. Sierra College gave honorary degrees 2 years before anybody else in the whole state.
Wow.
Community colleges.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, thank y'all. And cookies are over there.
So I'm going to go get the pictures of the interviews in a second.
Oh, okay, cool. I couldn't get my PowerPoint to work, so there.
Oh, that way the screen went up.